2024 is here, which seems like a good time to revisit a question I get a lot on this channel. How do you get into Star Wars books for the very first time? There are a ton of books to choose from, so it can easily feel like an overwhelming challenge. Well, let me tell you that you've come to the right place. I've said it before, but one of my favorite things to hear on this channel is someone telling us that we've encouraged them to read a Star Wars book or comic for the first time. The Star Wars fandom is huge. It's hard to find someone who hasn't seen the Star Wars movies. There are a lot of people watching the live action and animated series as well, but books and comics don't get nearly the same amount of attention. I personally love them because they were an integral part of my budding fandom back in the 90s when there weren't new movies and shows coming out. All I had was the original trilogy, a few video games, and books. So to this day, I love reading Star Wars books. Let me see if I can help a few fans get into them for the first time. First, I think you should decide whether or not you want to read the current canon or the old expanded universe, now classified as Star Wars Legends. Those were those 90s books I was talking about. I do think there's a reason to dive into those stories, especially with the direction Ahsoka seems to be taking with the live-action New Republic series. But I already did a video on Legends and those starting points. I'm going to focus on the current canon for this video, but if you're interested in Legends, check out the video in the cards. I'm going to take a similar approach for this video and provide a couple jumping off points into the canon books depending on the kind of reader you are or what appeals to you about Star Wars. My top recommendation right now is to get into the High Republic. That series of books and comics takes me back to the 90s and the old style of Star Wars Legends books, an ongoing story told over multiple books written by several different authors. Every novel feels big and important to the timeline, there's a huge cast of characters, the villains are unique, it gives readers something fresh while still feeling familiar enough. I'll admit that by now, just getting into the High Republic can feel daunting. There are currently 6 novels, 5 young adult novels, 5 middle grade books, and that's not including the short stories, audio dramas, and comics. But you can choose your own level of involvement. I would recommend starting with just the novels, Light of the Jedi, then The Rising Storm, The Fallen Star, Convergence, Cataclysm, and The Eye of Darkness. If along the way you are really getting invested, you can always add in the young adult or middle grade books or the comics. You don't have to read it all, but I have found that it's a rewarding experience. And for a bonus, reading these stories will give you an introduction to this era as we prepare for the live-action series The Acolyte, which will take place during the High Republic. Okay, but what if you have absolutely no interest in that time period? What if you want something more relevant to The Mandalorian and Ahsoka? Well, there are 6 Thrawn books that might interest you. Thrawn is one of my favorite Star Wars books, telling the story of how he rose up through Imperial ranks back during the time of Star Wars Rebels. Thrawn Alliances tells us about how he first met Anakin Skywalker, which the Grand Admiral referenced in Ahsoka. Thrawn Treason rounds out that trilogy, and then there's another trilogy set in Thrawn's home, the Chiss Ascendancy. If you want to know more about Grand Admiral Thrawn and his potential motivations, these books will give you exactly that. What if you were a fan of Andor? Maybe you want some stories about regular people doing their best to make the galaxy a better place. The Alphabet Squadron trilogy by Alexander Freed is awesome. They're pilot stories, and there aren't any Jedi or Sith in them. I know that can be a turnoff for some Star Wars fans, but they are so good. They're far more grounded in their storytelling and get into some heavy themes, just like Andor. If you're more interested in reading about the Force, and specifically the dark side, Inquisitor Rise of the Red Blade by Delilah Dawson came out just last year and gave us our best look at how Imperial Inquisitors were recruited and operated in the days after Order 66. What if you're a fan of specific trilogies and want more Clone Wars era stories, for example? Dark Disciple by Christie Golden is an adaptation of a Clone Wars arc that was never finished about Quinlan Vos and Asajj Ventress. I remember it as one of the first canon books that really got my attention. Brotherhood by Mike Chin is an excellent Obi-Wan and Anakin story all about how they adjusted from a teacher and student relationship into peers in the earliest days of the Clone Wars, and finally told us all about that business on Cato Nemoidia. For original trilogy fans, Lost Stars by Claudia Gray is another one of my all-time favorite Star Wars books. It retells the events of the original trilogy from the point of view of 2 childhood friends. One winds up in the Empire and one in the Rebellion, and there's a whole star-crossed lovers story going on in the midst of the Galactic Civil War, and it rocks. If you want something that expands on the sequel trilogy, Shadow of the Sith by Adam Christopher dives into Luke, Lando, Rey, and her parents in the years leading up to The Force Awakens. It answers some, but not all of the questions that were raised by The Rise of Skywalker. And I also have to mention Bloodline by Claudia Gray once again. That tells Leia's story in between the trilogies and provides a lot of political context surrounding the New Republic that I think enhances what little we saw of it in Episode 7. Honestly, pick up any Claudia Gray book and the chances are high that it will be awesome. Delilah Dawson is another author that I would say has yet to write a novel I didn't enjoy. I think that's enough potential jumping off points. It's difficult to give a simple, easy answer to this question because there are so many different ways to love Star Wars. Every author has a different style. Not everyone is going to love reading about pilots and Alphabet Squadron, for example, but it's the kind of thing I grew up loving thanks to the Legends X-Wing books. But if I had to pick just one book to read as your very first Star Wars book, I think I would go with Lost Stars. It's not a big commitment to a long series or trilogy, and it's a familiar story from a new perspective that's fun to read. It's a good way to ease into the books, and if you decide you like it, you can take a deeper plunge into something less familiar. But those are my recommendations. I hope that helps some of you get into Star Wars books for the very first time. Leave your own favorites in the comments. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on our socials, and consider checking out our Patreon page. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.